Ronald Giroud had always prided himself on being a man of science. Not the kind who wore lab coats and memorized periodic tables, mind you, but the practical sort who understood that the universe operated on predictable principles. Gravity pulled things down, fire burned things up, and biological reproduction required two compatible organisms of the same species. That last bit, as it turned out, was about to become significantly more complicated. The Meridian station hummed, with its usual blend of recycled air and barely contained chaos. As humanity's first diplomatic outpost in the Andromeda sector, it hosted a rotating cast of alien species, each more impossible than the last. Ronald, serving as the station's chief xenobiologist, had cataloged 17 different forms of silicon-based life. 3 energy beings who communicated through interpretive dance, and one particularly insufferable species that reproduced by arguing until they achieved cellular mitosis. But none of them had prepared him for Zixthara. She and Ronald used the pronoun loosely, given that Zixthara's species considered gender about as relevant as shoe. Sai stood 7 feet tall with skin that shifted between deep purple and electric blue, depending on her mood. Her 4 arms moved with an almost hypnotic grace, while her elongated head housed 3 eyes that could track different objects simultaneously. It was deeply unsettling and oddly beautiful, like watching a praying mantis perform ballet. "Dr. Giroud," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones typical of her species. "The Vel'Tar. I require your expertise regarding human reproductive biology." Ronald nearly choked on his synthetic coffee. After 6 months of fielding questions about human dietary restrictions, sleep cycles, and social hierarchies, this was refreshingly direct. "Also concerning, I'm flattered by your interest in human biology," he replied, setting down his cup with deliberate care. "But I should mention that I'm a xenobiologist, not a reproductive specialist. My expertise lies more in the how aliens work department than the how humans make more humans department." Zixthara, as middle eye, focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. "Your modesty is noted but irrelevant. I have read your publications on cross-species biological compatibility, your theoretical framework for understanding reproductive barriers between species is ... comprehensive." Ronald shifted uncomfortably. His papers on reproductive isolation had been purely theoretical, exploring why different species couldn't interbreed and how evolution maintained genetic boundaries. It wasn't exactly light reading, and he was surprised anyone had bothered to translate it into Vel'Tar. "I appreciate you reading my work," he said carefully, "but I should clarify that those papers were about why species can't reproduce together, not how they could." "Precisely." Zixthara's skin flickered to a deeper purple, "which is why I found your conclusion so ... incomplete." 3 weeks later, Ronald stood in the station's medical bay, staring at a readout that defied everything he thought he knew about biology. The scanner had run its diagnostic 3 times, each result identical and equally impossible. "Well," said Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief medical officer, "this is new." Ronald gestured helplessly at the holographic display. "It's not possible. Humans and Vel'Tar share approximately 0% genetic compatibility. We're not even carbon-based in the same way. Their cellular structure is fundamentally different from ours. And yet," Elena said, highlighting a particular section of the scan, "here we are." The image showed Ronald's lower abdomen, where a small, distinctly non-human organism had taken up residence. It pulsed with its own internal light, a soft bioluminescence that seemed to follow no earthly rhythm. According to the scanner, it was approximately 3 centimeters in diameter and growing. "How is this even possible?" Ronald asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "According to the initial scans, the organism appears to be using your body as a sort of biological incubator. It's not technically pregnancy in the human sense, since it's not using your genetic material. Think of it more like very advanced parasitism, except the parasite is your offspring." Ronald stared at her. "That's supposed to be comforting?" "I'm a doctor, not a therapist," Elena shrugged. "But the good news is that it doesn't seem to be harming you. In fact, your cellular regeneration has increased by 30% since this started. Whatever it's doing, it's actually improving your health." "Fantastic. I'm a glowing incubator with improved healing." Ronald slumped into a chair. How do I explain this to the Diplomatic Council? Carefully, the truth was, Ronald had no idea how to explain it to anyone, including himself. 3 weeks ago, he'd been conducting a routine biological survey with xenobiologists, studying the unique properties of Vel'Tar reproduction. Their species used a form of genetic encoding that could theoretically adapt to any biological environment, but it required a compatible host organism to provide the necessary cellular framework. What he hadn't realized was that compatible host organism was a far more flexible concept than human biology textbooks suggested. There is one thing, Elena said, pulling up another section of the scan. The organism isn't just growing randomly. It's following a specific developmental pattern, and it's doing so in response to your own biological rhythms. Heart rate, hormone levels, even your sleep cycle. It's synchronizing with all of it. Ronald studied the readout with growing unease. You're saying it's bonding with me? I'm saying it's treating you like a parent. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Ronald's quarters. xenobiologist stood in his doorway, her skin cycling through a complex pattern of colors that he'd learned indicated deep emotional distress. Dr. Giroud, she said, her harmonic voice carrying an edge of something that might have been panic. We need to discuss the implications of our ... collaboration. Ronald gestured her inside, noting that she moved with less of her usual fluid grace. I take it you've heard about the results? The entire Vel'Tar Council has heard about the results. xenobiologist's 3 eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of intensity. They are concerned. Concerned about what, exactly? About the fact that you have achieved something no Vel'Tar has managed in over 3 centuries. Her skin flashed a brilliant gold. You have created a viable hybrid offspring. Ronald felt his stomach drop. Hybrid? I thought this was just some kind of advanced parasitism. Your human medical terminology is inadequate. xenobiologist began pacing, her forearms gesturing in complex patterns. What you carry is not a parasite. It is a new form of life, one that combines the genetic adaptability of the Vel'Tar with the biological resilience of humans. It is, by definition, our child. The word child hit Ronald like a physical blow. He'd been thinking of the organism as a medical anomaly, a biological curiosity to be studied and understood. The idea that it was actually a living being with 2 parents, one of whom was him, was almost too much to process. How is this possible? He asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Vel'Tar reproduction is not like human reproduction, xenobiologist explained, her skin settling into a steady blue. We do not simply combine genetic material. We create a biological blueprint that can adapt to any suitable host environment. The host provides the cellular framework, the nutrients, and the ... emotional resonance necessary for proper development. Emotional resonance? The offspring bonds with the host parent, learning not just biological patterns, but behavioral ones. It becomes attuned to the host's emotional state, social patterns, even their moral framework. xenobiologist's middle eye focused on him intently. In essence, it learns how to be alive by studying its host. Ronald sat down heavily. So it's not just growing inside me, it's learning to be human. Partially human, xenobiologist corrected. It will also inherit Vel'Tar capabilities, enhanced strength, extended lifespan, the ability to adapt to different environments. But its personality, its values, its understanding of relationships and society, those will come from you. The implications were staggering. Ronald wasn't just carrying an alien organism. He was raising it, teaching it, shaping its development through his own biological and emotional responses. Every reaction he had, every stress response, every moment of joy or frustration was being recorded and incorporated into the developing consciousness. There's something else, xenobiologist continued, her skin flickering to a deep purple. The Vel'Tar Council has classified our offspring as a potential security threat. What kind of security threat? The kind that could bridge the gap between 2 species that have been unable to communicate effectively for centuries. Her 3 eyes met his. They believe our child could become a translator, a mediator, someone who truly understands both human and Vel'Tar perspectives. That level of understanding could change the balance of power in this sector. Ronald felt a protective instinct he hadn't expected. Are they planning to do something about it? They want to study it, take it away after birth, raise it in a controlled environment, analyze its capabilities. Zixthara's skin flashed angry red. They see it as a weapon to be developed, not a child to be raised. And what do you see it as? For the first time since he'd known her, Zixthara seemed uncertain. I see it as ours, a responsibility we share, a being that deserves the chance to choose its own path. 2 months into what Ronald had reluctantly begun calling his pregnancy, the situation became significantly more complicated. The organism, which he'd started thinking of as Little Bit, though he hadn't shared that name with anyone, had developed rudimentary consciousness and was actively communicating with him, not through words, obviously, but through what could only be described as emotional impressions. When Ronald was stressed, Little Bit would emit a soothing warmth that somehow made everything feel more manageable. When he was happy, the organism would pulse with its own excitement. Most remarkably, when Ronald was making decisions, he could feel Little Bit's presence, not influencing his choices, but somehow observing them, learning from them. It's remarkable, Dr. Vasquez said during one of their weekly checkups. The organism is exhibiting signs of advanced cognitive development. It's not just growing physically, it's developing personality traits, preferences, even what appears to be a sense of humor. A sense of humor? Ronald asked. Yesterday, when you were complaining about the cafeteria food, your biological readings showed amusement, but it wasn't coming from you. It was coming from the organism. It found your frustration funny. Ronald found himself smiling despite everything. Great. My alien offspring is already developing a sarcastic sense of humor. There's something else, Elena continued. The organism is beginning to show signs of wanting to interact with the outside world. It's becoming more active when you're around other people, especially Zixthara. That made sense. Over the past weeks, Zixthara had become a regular visitor to Ronald's quarters. She would sit with him for hours, speaking in her harmonic language and teaching him about Vel'Tar culture. She claimed it was important for the child's development to be exposed to both parental influences. But Ronald suspected she was also genuinely enjoying the experience. The problem, Elena said, is that we're running out of time. The organism is developing faster than we initially calculated. At this rate, it'll be ready for birth within the next month. And then what? Then we find out if the Vel'Tar Council plans to make good on their threats. That evening, Ronald found Zixthara in the station's observation lounge, staring out at the stars. Her skin was cycling through a pattern he'd learned indicated deep contemplation. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into a chair beside her. "Your human currency is worthless in this sector," she replied, though her skin flickered with what he'd learned was her version of amusement. "But I appreciate the sentiment." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel past. Finally, Zixthara spoke. "I have been thinking about names," she said quietly. "Names for our child. In Vel'Tar culture, names are not given at birth, but earned through actions. But humans name their offspring immediately, do they not?" Ronald nodded. "Usually, though I have to admit, I've been calling it Little Bit in my head." Zixthara's skin flashed bright gold. Little Bit? It's a term of endearment. It means something, small but precious. I like that. Her skin settled into a warm blue, but perhaps something more formal would be appropriate. A name that reflects both our cultures. What did you have in mind? In Vel'Tar, we have a concept called Thrender. It means bridge between worlds. It seemed fitting. Ronald felt Little Bit pulse with what seemed like approval. Thrender Giroud? Or Thrender Zixthara Giroud, she corrected. "If you would accept me as co-parent." The question hung in the air between them. Ronald had been so focused on the biological impossibility of the situation that he'd almost forgotten the emotional reality. Zixthara wasn't just the genetic contributor to their child, she was its other parent, with all the responsibilities and rights that entailed. "I'd be honored," he said finally. Zixthara's skin brightened to a brilliant silver. "Then we must decide what to do about the council." The Vel'Tar delegation arrived 3 days before Thrender has projected birth. 5 imposing figures in flowing robes, their skin patterns indicating official displeasure and bureaucratic determination. They requested an immediate meeting with Ronald and Zixthara, using the kind of diplomatic language that was technically polite but practically threatening. Ronald, now moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying a very active alien offspring, met them in the station's main conference room. Zixthara stood beside him, her skin cycling through protective patterns that made her look like a living aurora. Dr. Giroud, said the lead delegate, whose name Ronald had been told was something like Safe Even Dar, but which he privately thought of, Bureaucrat Prime. We understand you have achieved an unprecedented biological synthesis with one of our people. That's one way to put it, Ronald replied dryly. The offspring you carry represents a potential breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. Bureaucrat Prime continued. As such, the Council believes it should be raised in a controlled environment where its capabilities can be properly studied and developed. You mean where it can be turned into a weapon? Zixthara interjected, her skin flashing warning colors. We prefer the term diplomatic asset, said another delegate. Ronald felt Thrender pulse with what seemed like indignation. Even in utero, their child apparently had opinions about being treated as a political tool. Here's the thing, Ronald said, placing a protective hand over his abdomen. I've spent the last 3 months learning about Vel'Tar biology, culture, and philosophy. I've read your histories, studied your art, even learned some of your language. And you know what I've discovered? The delegates waited with the patience of professional bureaucrats. You're not that different from us, Ronald continued. You value family, you protect your children, you want them to have the freedom to choose their own paths. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. Would you let a committee of strangers raise your child? Bureaucrat Prime's skin flickered. The circumstances are unprecedented. The circumstances are that I'm about to become a parent. Ronald interrupted. And my child, our child, deserves to grow up with their family, not in a laboratory. A hybrid could be dangerous, another delegate argued. Unprecedented abilities, unknown psychological development. Yeah, it could be dangerous, Ronald agreed. Just like every other child who's ever been born. They might grow up to be a poet or a politician or a serial killer. That's the risk you take with consciousness. But you know what's more dangerous than an unknown future? A childhood without love. Zixthara stepped forward, her skin blazing with protective colors. The child will be raised by both parents, she declared. It will learn both cultures, understand both perspectives. It will be what it chooses to be, not what we force it to become. And if it chooses to be a threat, Bureaucrat Prime asked, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Ronald said. But we're not going to condemn our child for crimes it hasn't committed. The delegates conferred among themselves in rapid Vel'Tar, their skin patterns shifting through complex negotiations. Finally, Bureaucrat Prime turned back to them. The Council will allow you to raise the child, he said slowly, but there will be conditions. Regular medical examinations, psychological evaluations, educational oversight. No, Ronald said firmly. Our child will have the same rights as any other child born on this station. Medical care when needed, education appropriate to their capabilities, and the freedom to develop their own identity without interference. Dr. Giroud, Bureaucrat Prime said, his skin darkening with official displeasure. You are hardly in a position to make demands. Actually, I am. Ronald smiled, feeling Thrender pulse with approval. Because I'm the one carrying your species' first successful hybrid offspring. I'm the proof that your reproductive theories were incomplete, that adaptation is possible in ways you never imagined. And I'm the one who can teach other humans how to form these bonds. The implication hung in the air like a diplomatic bomb. If the Vel'Tar wanted to study interspecies reproduction, they needed Ronald's cooperation. If they wanted to understand how human Vel'Tar hybrids developed, they needed him to be a successful parent. You're threatening us, Bureaucrat Prime observed. I'm offering you a partnership, Ronald corrected. Work with us to understand what we've created. Help us raise a child who can bridge our species, but do it as allies, not overlords. The delegates conferred again, their skin patterns cycling through what Ronald had learned with the colors of grudging acceptance. Very well, Bureaucrat Prime said finally. The child will remain with its parents, but the Council reserves the right to monitor its development. From a respectful distance, Zixthara added firmly. From a respectful distance, the delegate agreed with obvious reluctance. Thrender Zixthara Giroud entered the world 2 days later. In a burst of bioluminescent glory that temporarily overloaded the medical bay sensors. Ronald and Zixthara had agreed on gender-neutral pronouns until Thrender was old enough to choose, were simultaneously the most beautiful and most terrifying thing Ronald had ever seen. About the size of a human infant, but with the elongated limbs and facial features of the Vel'Tar. Thrender's skin cycled through every color Ronald had ever seen, and several he was pretty sure he'd imagined. Their eyes, 3 of them, like their Vel'Tar parent, tracked movement with startling intelligence, while their 4 arms waved with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of any newborn. "Hello, little bit," Ronald whispered, cradling his child for the first time. "Welcome to the universe." Thrender's skin flashed a brilliant gold, the Vel'Tar color for joy, and they made a sound that was somehow both a human giggle and a Vel'Tar harmonic trill. "I think they approve," Zixtara said, her own skin glowing with parental pride. The first few weeks were a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the unique challenges of raising a child who communicated through color changes and could digest both human breast milk and Vel'Tar nutrient paste. Ronald discovered that parenting an alien hybrid involved all the usual sleep deprivation and existential terror of normal parenting, plus the added excitement of never knowing what new ability their child might develop. At 3 weeks, Thrender began responding to emotional cues from both parents, their skin shifting to match the mood of whoever was holding them. At 6 weeks, they started experimenting with telepathic communication, sending simple emotional impressions to anyone within a few meters. By 2 months, they were displaying problem-solving abilities that impressed even the Vel'Tar Council. But perhaps most remarkably, they were developing a personality that was uniquely their own. Curious like their human parent, graceful like their Vel'Tar parent, but with a mischievous sense of humor that belonged to neither species. They would change their skin color to match whatever they were wearing, apparently finding it hilarious when adults tried to figure out where they'd gone. They showed an early fascination with music, harmonizing with both human lullabies and Vel'Tar meditation chants. "They're going to be trouble," Ronald said one evening, watching Thrender attempt to change their skin to match the stars outside. "The viewport. All the best children are," Zixtara replied, her skin warm with contentment. The Vel'Tar Council had been true to their word, monitoring from a respectful distance and providing educational resources when requested. The other species on the station had embraced Thrender with surprising enthusiasm, apparently viewing the child as a symbol of the possibilities that came with interspecies cooperation. And Ronald? He was learning that being a parent was simultaneously the most terrifying and most rewarding experience in any universe. Every day brought new challenges, new discoveries, new moments of wonder, as he watched his child explore the world with the boundless curiosity of someone who belonged to 2 species but was constrained by neither. The universe, it turned out, was far more flexible than anyone had imagined. And sometimes, Ronald reflected as he watched his daughter's first attempts at walking on 4 legs while maintaining perfect balance. The most impossible things are also the most beautiful. "So," he said to Zixtara one evening as they watched Thrender sleep, their skin cycling through peaceful dream colors, "Any thoughts on having another one?" Zixtara's skin flashed pure terror before settling into amused purple. "Ask me again in a few years," Ronald laughed, feeling the deep satisfaction of a man who had accidentally revolutionized galactic biology and somehow managed to become a decent parent in the process. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was definitely the life he'd chosen. And in the grand scheme of the universe, that seemed like a pretty human thing to do.